Okay, I'm gonna just go ahead and start. Instagram once again was not cooperating. I don't know why. Very sensitive. Anyway, it's
My
11 o'clock.
camera's
It's
working,
Tuesday.
so we're good.
Yours? Okay, then you can send it to
Yeah,
me. Okay,
yeah.
I welcome you to our 11 o'clock every Tuesday show called Sand to Soul. I'm Stuart Fournier. I'm a 25-year veteran of the real estate world here in Los Angeles and specifically the beach cities. And it's my pleasure to introduce my lovely co-host.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. Happy Tuesday. It's Anastasia Bonholzer. Welcome back from AMS Mortgage Services. I am a mortgage broker in the South Bay, Los Angeles Beach City. I also have licensing capabilities in Texas and Florida. Good morning. Good morning. Hello, everyone. Can you feel me?
Gosh, sorry about that. I gotta
You're
get this
good. You're
applause
good.
thing. I gotta get this applause thing down. Anyway,
Yeah.
we're here every Tuesday at 11 a.m. talking about real estate in the South Bay, and today we're going to talk about actually something that applies to everybody across the nation, and that is representation. Now, as some of you may know, about a year ago, there was a tectonic shift in the way that realtors could show houses. And there's still to this day a lot of confusion as to what that really means for you, the buyer, and of course, the seller, in terms of being able to have people access your home to see your home. And what happened last year was there was an ethical rule that was placed into effect across the nation. And that ethical rule said realtors can no longer show homes to anyone without a prior signed agreement for representation of that person seeing that home. And then later on in the year, later on in 2024, the state of California actually went a step further and made it a law. So
Yep.
it is an offense now if you show a house before you have a signed agreement. Now there's
Mhm.
some confusion over whether you can actually have that contract signed before you make an offer with regard to the law. And that's what kind of makes things confusing because both ethically and lawfully, we as realtors are obligated to create representation with you if we're going to show a home. And the state says one thing in terms of the actual timing, and but our ethical rules say something different. And the ethical rules, which is what everyone should be following, shouldn't have
Mhm.
to be a law, states that you really have to have it before you see the property. So it's
What about
uh,
if you put somebody like on a drip campaign? You know, you send a client, you meet somebody on the street. Let's say I'm having Taco Tuesdays at my favorite place, Mi Burrito in Redondo Beach, and and I'm an agent, and I meet the guy next to me at the bar, and I say, hey, let me just send you some listings that are here locally that you might be interested in. Is that representation, or is it the
yes.
physical showing of properties representation?
Well, if you're the client, let me, I don't know if this is going to make it clearer or more complicated, but I love to answer these questions in their entirety. So there's no misinterpretation of what I'm saying. If you, let's say, for example, Anastasia, feel like I am educating you, if you feel that I'm sending you properties, giving you information, the answer is yes, I do. I'm actually practicing representation. However,
Mhm.
the second part of the answer to that question is no, I don't have to have you signed up for that. But if I go to physically show you a home, then we have to sign a contract. So
Mhm,
therein
mhm,
lies the distinction. That's why representation becomes very
mhm,
confusing. Just commenting or just giving you any advice causes what we call agency. So you have to be very
mhm,
careful of that, right?
mhm,
If I'm giving you advice, no matter who you are, about my expertise in any way, shape, or form, I'm causing some kind of relationship. Now, obviously, written relationship is the golden rule in real estate, and especially if you're making offers. It's one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this today, because we had a situation uh, over the weekend where someone wanted to see one of our listings that we did not represent. It was a cold, someone who called us off of our website and said, I want to see this property. And Randy said, okay, but before I show you, I have to send a contract out to you just for representation. Now, this is going to be just representation for this specific property. We're not trying
Mhm.
to snag you into forcing you to be our realtors for anything other than that. But it's because you're not represented. Uh, this person obviously was not represented by a buyer's agent. They were just on their own.
Mhm.
Now, this buyer happened to be very savvy about the situation and said, no, it's my understanding that if you get permission from the seller to let me see the house without being represented by you, I don't have to sign that contract. And you know what? That buyer was correct.
Oh
So
wow.
that's why I wanted to bring it up, is because as long as the buyer agrees that we are not representing them, even though we're showing the house exclusively to them, this is not an open
Mhm.
house, and I'll get into that in just a section. If
Mhm.
we review with the seller, we have someone that wants to see a house, but we as a listing agent are not going to represent them, then they can see the house without a representation contract. Right.
Mm.
So those are the sticking points that, we run into every day. And I can understand why the public is very confused by some of these rules and
Yeah,
regulations. Now,
it seems like a lot of the details are still being ironed out because I remember when they rolled this out August 17th of last year. We're now in the grits of things for more than a year now, and the buyers are still confused as to these different innuendos that come up. I mean, I didn't even personally know the information that you're telling me. It would be nice for National Association of Realtors and California Association of Realtors to go through and actually identify and frequently asked questions type of forum, all the different scenarios that come up and when would one need to sign it and what would be an exception.
well, that's why they need to tune into Sand to Soul. That's it,
Right.
because that's what we're talking
Apart from
about,
our
right?
webinar, right?
And I
And
say
that's
that
great to
so.
know.
Right. I say that somewhat facetiously, but the truth of the matter is, even realtors are a little confused, as were we about that specific
Yeah.
example, because obviously we called our broker and said, okay, we don't want to, rub anybody the wrong way. So before we, let this potential buyer know what the
Yeah.
situation is, we want to double check. So yeah, it gets more
And so in
interesting.
that case though, so you showed the home and if that person wanted to submit an offer at that point, they would be required obviously to then sign,
Right.
the representation agreement.
And here's the real interesting snag on this one, and I'll tell the story a little bit. Now, this particular buyer actually threw out a number to buy the property. So
Mm.
now you have to ask yourself, okay, if you're throwing a number out to me and you want me to go on your behalf to tell my seller that you're throwing out a number, do I represent you now? In other words,
Right.
am I negotiating for you? So
Hmm.
we didn't get the indication that that's what this buyer wanted. So we had to very delicately go to the seller and say, first of all, the seller, of course, is the person that we're representing. And
Hmm.
we had to tell the seller, now you have a potential buyer that threw out a number, but we are not negotiating for them. What we're
Hmm.
simply doing is providing information to you about what they said to us. But that's
Hmm.
as far as it goes in terms of our representation of that
Hmm.
person to you. So it gets even a little sticky for us as realtors, right?
Yeah.
Because here's the other part of that that makes it even more complicated. And for you realtors out there, I hope you're listening. But that client said, if the seller is amenable to that price, then we want you to represent us.
Okay.
So that gets even stickier, right? Because now we have to go to the seller, tell the seller that there's been a verbal offer, if you will, that we're
Right.
not representing. However, if you're amenable to that, then that buyer wants us to represent them. So it gets even stickier. So the bottom
Is
line,
there then a rep and then the buyer at that point would think that they're going to get some kind of deal in the transaction because if you're representing both sides, at least that's what buyers think, you're you're going to get less commission as a result or whatever.
Right.
So
And you've brought up a whole nother subject we'd have to spend another half an hour talking about.
I know
But I will
it's
tell you
confusing
this.
on that side.
Yeah, after 25 years in this business, I will tell you this. For those of you that think you're going to get a special deal because you're represented on both sides, it's really a subject that you need to tear apart and understand because it's an it's a very common thing that buyers make a mistake with. And I don't suggest it. I really don't. And most
Yeah,
agents don't like it. And the reason that we don't like it is that if you are representing both sides, there is a 90% chance that someone at the end of the transactions gonna feel that you represented one side a little more favorably than the other. And
yeah.
no matter what your relationship is with either side, no matter how friendly you are, I can almost guarantee you that's going to happen.
No, it's
But
hard to
again,
split yourself in a fiduciary duty sense because your objective is different. For the seller, you're trying to net them the most. For the buyer, you're trying to get them the lowest purchase price. And it is hard at times to be a neutral party at that point.
it's very difficult. But here's the thing. It is ethical and it is legal in
Yep.
California. And the philosophy behind that, just to give it some credence, in other words, to give it some credibility, is that transactions are not considered adversary. And that's a big difference between, for example, what lawyers do versus what a real estate agent does. Transactions are looked upon as non-adversary, and you should be able to represent both sides in a fair and equal manner. And we have on occasion done that, not very often. There are certain circumstances where we feel comfortable with it, but a majority of circumstances we do not. And like, and as you say, that's another
Yeah.
subject that we could get into specifically, and I'll demonstrate exactly why
Yeah.
that can definitely not work
So
in your
a
favor.
couple of things, Stuart. From the lender's perspective, at least what I've seen is the advantage of this type of agreement now, which is law, is the buyer's agent don't have to spin their wheels working with a buyer for 2, 3 years, only to find out that the buyer decided to either go with another agent or to continue to rent. So it does, make that relationship more serious in some sense, which is better for the buyer's agent because they're not in certain respects wasting their time with somebody who's not motivated to purchase. And then
Well,
the flip side to it is, though, for the buyer, there's no more window shopping essentially unless you do know these certain loopholes. How do we view a home without signing an agreement with an agent?
right. Well, understand though one thing, you can only have these contracts for 90 days. So
Hmm.
you cannot sign a contract for a year or two or anything like that. It goes, and in fact, you and I talked about this very briefly before we came on the air. First of all, you can't go past 90 days, whether it's a single showing or whether you've agreed to have the agent show you for the next 3 months. So that changes that up a little bit. So in essence, you're right. It does, especially if you're seeing more than one property, it can obligate the buyer to stay with that agent for 3 months if that's what they agree to. But by the same token, if you haven't developed a relationship with your buyer after 3 months and there isn't some sense of, uh, credibility there, you probably
Mhm.
don't deserve that person to keep that person anyway,
I
right?
agree.
So it is an interview process. Now, if for
Yep.
any reason the agent during those 3 months was not representing you the way that you wanted to be represented, obviously there's parts of the contract that allow for you to get out. And
Yep.
you're not stuck with that agent for 3 months if you really have some angst or if you have an issue with them. And I would say a good portion of the time, agents kind of know. So if there's a bad relationship, they don't want it either.
Yeah.
So
And I want to
but you,
bring up another point, and this has to do with compensation again. Unfortunately, if the buyer signs a certain compensation structure and agreement with their buyer's agent, and then they go to buy the property, and the compensation offered is less than that contract price initially, there will be a gap in compensation, which the buyer will then be responsible for. They can continue to renegotiate with their own agent, but there's definitely a gap. And now the lenders are asking for a copy of the original agreement with their buyer's agent. just to make sure that at the end of the transaction, the buyer is not owed any additional funds outside of down payment and closing costs. Because if there is a gap between the agreed upon price with their own agent and whatever the seller's offering at that point is less, we do have to consider that as part of cash to close, which has happened in certain transactions. Not that often, still, sellers, for the most part, covering the entire compensation structure, whatever the agreed upon price, or the buyer is able to renegotiate for a lower one if that's the case. But so I just wanted to bring that out that, the lender does see this agreement now.
You know, it's so fascinating on our show. For those of you that are watching, very often Anastasia and I get into subject matters that probably you've never thought of because we she sees examples and I do too here. And of course, we're at 16 minutes already, and she's brought up something that would take me another 20 minutes to explain. So I'm going to do it very briefly. For those of you that are tuning in, you get somewhat of an explanation of this. First of all, number one, you're absolutely correct, Anastasia. There is a variable that can be applied to when the negotiations are going on, and there needs to be another agreement about the actual compensation agreement. And that is something that you want to have a deep conversation with your realtor when that subject matter comes up. You may run into a seller who does not want to compensate the buyer's agent in a way that's been agreed upon between the buyer's agent and the buyer, and that can get very sticky and very complicated. But it doesn't have to be. It can be. It should be. Excuse me. That's the better word. You should have a relationship with your realtor wherein you both agree that there needs to be an adjustment and then work out what that adjustment is.
Mhm.
One thing I'd like to stress in real estate transactions, especially here in California, is there's always room to negotiate something when another variable comes up. It's, you know, people can dig in their heels on specific things, but it's pretty rare that it's worth it to do that because legal costs usually have no bearing on, I shouldn't say no bearing, but no relationship to the reality of the true legal costs that it takes to
Yep.
argue, our contracts. So having a relationship and having a good relationship with your realtor is what becomes super essential at this point. We can wave
Mhm.
our flags all we want, but the bottom line is you're paying for professionalism. You're paying for people that understand these variables, and you're paying for people that have experience with working these things out. And that
Mhm.
contract allows for that. All of our contracts allow for that, not just for commissions, but for other situations too, between the buyer and the seller, between the buyer and the agents, between the buyer and the listing agents. I mean, there's so many things that go into effect. So yes, real estate has become extremely complicated in terms
Even
of the
greater importance
transactions.
on why representation
Right.
by an agent is not only recommended but also to somebody's advantage. Just like FISBOs, for sale by owner, they think they're saving
Correct.
on the costs of the compensation for the listing agent, and I completely disagree with that because the amount of marketing efforts that listing agents have in order to bring greater exposure, greater pool of buyers to come through the open house, that could drive the price up substantially,
Right.
rather than somebody trying to sell the home on their own, thinking they're going to save on that, compensation between their agents. So
Exactly.
that's a neither here or there. We can go on indefinitely. But next week
But
we have some very exciting a topic that we kind of want to in advance share with you.
yeah,
And
just one
Stuart,
one thing before I get into that. I want to talk about open houses. Please,
hmm,
even though we're having this discussion about representation, open houses is a whole different animal. You can still go to open houses without being represented. When you go to an open house, that we do have you sign in to actually state that we don't represent you. So going and signing in at open houses is essential. You can't just walk in anymore and not put your name down because it becomes a sticky point. So we don't mean to discourage you from open houses. You can still go to open houses even if you are not represented. Okay.
okay, perfect.
One last thing. Yes, next week we're going to tackle a subject that's become extremely emotional for residential owners and owners in general in California, and has been a hot topic here in the beach cities, both Manhattan, Hermosa, and Redondo. And as a former planning commissioner, I have a lot of experience. I have a lot of knowledge about the true facts about affordable housing. So we're going to talk about affordable housing and how it relates to the beach cities and answer any questions that you may have. If you have any questions in advance about the affordable housing rules or about the affordable housing process here in the beach cities, we had an example with uh, a Hermosa Beach situation with the AES plant in Redondo. And of course, I'm forgetting the name of the project over on Rosecrans. Um,
Yeah, the
the,
Glendale Galleria is getting a
the
revamp.
kid,
It's a builder's, yeah, builder's remedy, and you know the need
Builder's
for
Remedy. Yeah.
affordable housing. Yeah, the need for affordable housing among the residentials. You know, do we want high rises among the single family homes? You know,
Right.
do we have a way to stop it? And that's what we'll discuss next week.
Right. And it was verandas, is what I was speaking to.
Mm,
But there's also a 7-story apartment complex that's going up on in
mm,
Manhattan Beach, near the corner of Marine and Sepulveda. And there's
mm.
a lot of controversy about that. So we're going to address those next week. We may be on for a little longer. But if you have any questions about that, those particular subject matters, please go ahead and forward them now on the comments section, and we'll be happy to discuss those. So, once again, everyone, we're so glad you joined us at 11 o'clock every Tuesday. And if you have this, if you find these programs interesting, please forward them to your friends and family and let them know that we're here to answer their questions about real estate anytime.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, and have a good one. We'll
Okay.
see you next week.
Bye, everybody. Bye bye.
Bye.